are sticking around for the second round. So I put together a PowerPoint for you that I'd like to share so we can follow along. Allow me just one moment to do the share screen. Where is it? Yes. Oof, what a mess. I am so sorry, everybody. Okay, here we go. All right, so I came up with this title, Connection, Writing Oneself and What It Means to Publish, because I do have a message that I want to carry throughout as I talk about my own experience. So I put together these questions for all of you, and I really would like you to take notes and to really think about it, because I think it will help make more sense of what I'm saying today if you take a moment to answer these questions for yourself. And I would like you to share your answers later. So the first one is, have you ever felt satisfied within reason? Within reason. And I say within reason because you could polish a text to no end with something that you've written. And this includes anything at all. It could be an academic essay, song lyrics, even a clever social media post that you wanted to, update on Facebook, anything at all. And second, did you share it with others? And how did that make you feel? So sharing it with others, if you are writing for one of your courses, and you obviously have to share it with your professor, and so how did that make you feel? That is valid as well. So anything at all. And finally, has anything you've read made an impact on your life? Anything that has helped you understand yourself better, others, or the world around you? So this could also be in any format. You don't have to think of a book or anything that is canon. It could be a letter from a friend, from a loved one, anything that you've read. And the reason I'm making this distinction I'm talking about reading and writing specifically is because reading and writing are different exercises from oral communication. And I'm thinking about storytelling, even plays and film. The way that we process these, you could also call them texts, but the way that we process stories that we hear, stories that we see on screen, it's a very different experience as reading or deep reading text. The way our mind registers that is as an experience similar to the way dreams, unconsciously, your mind can differentiate something you dreamed in your memory bank from something that actually happened to you. So I thought I would just mention why there's a difference between the act of communicating by speaking, because why write? So we write because we have something to say, obviously, but there could be many reasons why we put together a text. However, they are different processes than speech or other methods. So that's why I put Walter J. Ong's quote up there. Words are grounded in speech, but writing tyrannically locks them into a visual field forever. So you are creating codes, language, in a specific way using a specific technology, which is writing. But why do we write at all? Medium said something that I like very much. We write for ourselves, and I 100% agree with that. And I think it's kind of what I was trying to say, but she said it in such a simple way that works so much better. Writing structures our thoughts. It is an exercise in thinking. And when I wrote this particular point, I was thinking about, I know some of the guest students today are students of composition. So when you're writing an essay, you are solidifying your abstract ideas. So you do have to present a thought. You have to make it cohesive. You have to analyze a certain topic. So that exercise of writing helps you kind of figure things out, how you actually feel, how you actually think about your subject. And then there's poetry. Now, writing poetry is different, obviously, than writing anything non-poetic, writing prose. But it does allow us certain artistic liberties where we can be less concerned with what is style, structure, even grammar. So you can kind of just, pour all your ideas out. With poetry, it does allow you that. And I am borrowing this notion from Sigmund Freud that poetic language is the language of dreams. That is actually from his text, The Interpretation of Dreams. Because when you're writing, even when you're reading and interpreting poetry relies heavily on imagery, anything that has to do with the five senses more than expressing concepts plainly. So just like poems aren't straightforward in their message, neither are the images presented to us in dreams. So to me, poetry and dreams are very closely tied together. So, and when you retell dreams, let's say you sit down with someone to tell them about a dream you had, which I hope you do. I've heard from people, I don't dream, I don't remember my dreams. Actually, you're not supposed to remember your dreams, it's not important, but if you do, and if you have maybe a disturbing dream or a really inspiring dream and you want to tell somebody about it, in my experience and a lot of people's experience, you have to kind of put it together, make it make sense, and it starts to make sense when you tell the dream, when you put it into language. So that's what I call a dream translation, because you're actually naming those images that you see in your dream. So you're using words to narrate and to organize disjointed imagery that maybe didn't even make sense. And finally, I think sometimes writing can be like a form of prayer, in the sense that you are, I'm sorry, I'm just going to read from my notes. It's just so much easier. It flows better. I'm not very good at improvising. So my note is, if we are open and willing to see and really look into ourselves, writing can reveal your values, your desires, and your sources of joy and sorrow. So I myself don't do the exercise of prayer, but I had a lot of loved ones growing up that did. My grandmother was very big on praying, and I did go to Catholic school where it was mandatory to pray. But it was an interesting exercise, and I often go back to that, not just reciting poetry to yourself. Maybe some of you have memorized your favorite poems, or if you have any like comfort poetry that you sometimes think about, even lyrics, it could be lyrics. We're just kind of recite it in your mind as a lullaby to yourself, but then when you're composing your own thoughts in the form of poetry or even poetic prose, you are working through maybe issues that you have. And it is also an exercise in thinking, just without that structure, but you are kind of seeing certain feelings or conflicts more clearly, and you are better able to resolve them. Now, the next question is, why publish? So the reasons, I think the number one reason why we publish at all is to share our work so that other people can read it. In the simplest, by the simplest definition of publishing is to make something public. So I'm not sure if some of you who are here have the intention, are already published. I'm sure some of you are, or some of you intend to. So there might be different goals behind, I want to publish. First of all, what are you publishing and why are you publishing it? So you could, maybe want to look for professional opportunities. If you're looking into teaching at a college, you kind of have to, and it needs to be on your CV. Or maybe you just want the recognition, or you just want to put your work out there and have other people share it. But ultimately, we're always contributing when we publish. We're contributing to our culture, and we're adding our experiences, our perspective, and our particular artistic styles to our community. So, ultimately, I think you just want to connect with people. Even when we talk about academic publications. And prestigious publications can give you certain leverage, especially, professionally. But more informal publications, like in a student magazine or an online blog, it can gain you fans and followers. You never know. So some of my thoughts on what it means to publish. When you decide to permanently put a text of yours out there, you will feel exposed and you will feel vulnerable, because writers, just like any type of artist and even academics, we tend to feel that any opinions about our work are opinions about ourselves as people, and that's not always the case. But we can feel that vulnerability. I certainly do. I think I'm over it, but I never really am. But it is very rewarding once you start sharing your work, because once made accessible, what was otherwise in your phone, in your computer files, or in your private notebooks, it's now out there, and someone, will most likely find some value in it. And something I'd like to mention, I've noticed, I'm not saying this is always the case, but small artistic communities, and this includes writers, tend to be very nurturing. You might think that you will get harsh critique, that people will hate it. Most of the time, that's not the case. So, don't be afraid to make yourself that kind of vulnerable. And you never know whose life you might touch because they read something that you wrote and it meant something to them. It helped them understand an issue. Or very often, one of my favorite comments, not that I get this that often, but I have in my lifetime, when someone I might not even know tells me, oh, these feelings that you've talked about, that you write about in this poem, I felt this, but I never knew how to say it. That means the world to me. Helping somebody, see themselves in a line of poetry. And finally, you need connections. And so it is a thought on publishing. I'm not saying that you need to be connected in order to publish, but that we need connections as human beings. And by making our work public, we are creating those connections. So I made some notes on two types of poets and writers, and this probably transcends other genres as well, which are the more extroverted and more introverted types of poets. Oops, not yet, sorry. So the extroverted, if you're the extroverted type of poet, you might enjoy open mics or open mic activities, or just reading your poetry. If you have your own poetry memorized, power to you. Or, people who really get involved and get other people moving, and they tend to be, I think, more outspoken than what I call the introverted poets, who kind of, and I relate to that group, where we, just silently write our poems in this very mysterious, ethereal voice that we never want heard. I honestly, I'll read my poetry. I've learned that it's not as bad as I love hearing other people read their poetry. I adore it. But I don't like reading mine, but I've had to. But if I were given a choice, I wouldn't. It's just a personal thing. And I've known some excellent poets that I've known personally who just like, hey, I have a new poem, and they just pass it to you on a note, one-to-one. It's not that they, put it out there. So, depending on what kind of person, I guess, you are, you might not feel that vulnerability that I'm talking about. But now I am going to talk a little bit about my own journey and experience as a writer. So I have these photos of my hometown, the one on the left, and the Catholic school that I went to that was my middle and high school. So this is an influence to me because I was an only child and I didn't have many friends as a little kid. I know it sounds strange, but I didn't have neighbors in the mountain where I lived. I don't know, kids in my schools are just different, and I just found it very hard to, actually the kids weren't different, I was different, let's just say it that way. So I did love books and literature because I was fortunate enough to have a mom who had books in the house, and she did buy children's books for me that I would, even before I could read, I would look through them and start, kind of nurturing that imagination. And I think one of my earliest influences, something that I absolutely loved and still do, were nursery rhymes and Mother Goose rhymes, some of which I later learned were from other books like Alice in Wonderland, the Humpty Dumpty rhyme. It comes from Lewis Carroll. I was even reading Emily Dickinson as kids' poems, and T.S. Eliot with the Jellicle Cats. So I didn't know what I was nurturing when I was a child, but I think it did inspire me to make rhymes and poems of my own. And I actually did start writing since I was a little kid without even knowing what I was doing. Now, it was difficult for me in my teen years to connect, because I think when you're of a certain age, not necessarily, but I did want the approval of my peers. And none of the kids in my middle school or in my high school were big on writing or reading at all. So the kids that I knew at that time. So I had a lot of time to myself, and I would write many, many, many poems, which is where Everything Lost is Found germinated. So you do have some poems in your sampler that Dr. Cano shared with you, and they are those 5 poems. So what this is, basically, I took all those manuscripts, those old notebooks from when I was ages 12 to maybe 17, 18, and tried to find, which poems were the best, so to speak. So I call them salvageable because some of them, they were very repetitive. To be honest, I wrote it, honestly, the same things over and over. That's what I found. It was a tortuous process editing for this. I made myself sick reading all these poems, and they weren't very good. I was very young, obviously, but I tried, for the ones that are in the book, I tried to keep them as original as I humanly could. I didn't do any heavy editing. I did edit a little bit, but it's almost, as that poetry was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I divided it up into 3 chapters, and you do have poems, I believe, from each of the chapters. I kind of structured it in a way that was similar to my environment when I was growing up. So I had the garden, the house, and the wilderness. And in gardens contains all those poems that do have some nature imagery, but it's still kind of contained. It has kind of a more domestic feel in terms of imagery. And house, the poems in house most take place in like indoor settings, but also there are a lot of analogies regarding walls, windows, and doors, even floors. Like, I know it sounds kind of silly when I say it this way, but it's basically describing indoor settings and the feeling of being trapped or reclusive. And there are some allusions to computers and technology. And then there's wilderness, which I believe are the most, maybe the more lighthearted poems, which do have nature imagery, but they're more fantastic. So these, I did illustrate the book. I'm sorry, I don't think I mentioned that. So those drawings are from the book, and they do kind of represent each of the chapters. And these are the drawings accompanying the poems that that were included in your sampler. So a ribbon and paper sky, to me, they were kind of, two faces of the same coin. They open and close where everything lost is found. And it's full of drawings, many of which I did draw when I was younger. Some I drew more recently, but I try to keep that style. And then also there's Stars Like Fish, from which you have the poems and bullets in your sampler. So what Stars Like Fish was at the time was an anthology of poetic prose, because they're not really poems per se, they read like poems. Most of the texts in here do. but they're not in their structure. So I call them dream transcriptions. A lot of them were directly inspired by dreams or actual dreams that I tried to organize into language. And I did accompany these with photos that I had taken, and I edited them to look more degraded and decayed. So in Stars Like Fish, I don't think I planned it, but there is a lot of, I think, a lot of nature imagery and a lot of, I think, maybe ecological concerns that I guess after the fact I realized this is kind of a running topic in this book. And okay, so I can share that link in the chat if you'd like to later on, because I do love talking about dreams in regular conversation, everyday conversation, and also as a source of creativity. So I gave a presentation on that some time ago that I posted on my blog, so you can check it out later if you'd like. And then finally, 3 of the poems in your sampler are some poems in Spanish that Dr. Quijano told me I should include because there's not a whole lot of Spanish in these books. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 in each. So those are very recent. Those, I'm sorry, let me just check through my notes because there are a lot of things that I want to say but forget to say. Let me just 1 moment. Yeah. So I don't have any projects or plans to publish. I do share occasionally on my LiveJournal, which I'll go into in a moment. But in the last couple of years, I've been through a lot of changes. I moved out of Puerto Rico, and I've moved twice since I lived in the continental US. So moving is painful. Change is hard. So these poems definitely reflect a lot of what I've been feeling recently. And I think the main reason why I'm not focused so much on writing and publishing as a project recently is because I've been so busy. And also I've had difficult times. And I did mention that writing kind of inevitably reveals what's in your heart. So I remember when I sent these poems to Professor Quijano, I told him this was so difficult to do because I had those feelings, I had those ideas, those images in me, and reliving them in writing. It was just hard. It was they were kind of painful to write, but I'm so glad that I did, and I'm so glad that I shared them with you. You guys are the only ones that have read those so far. I haven't shared them with anybody else, which is interesting. But eventually, I do intend to keep. I can't stop writing. I've never really stopped, but I don't always have an audience in mind. I just write, and the publishing ideas usually come later. Now, on the topic of publishing, when I was very young, when I wrote those poems in Where Everything Lost Is Found, and the ones that aren't in the book, I thought that, publishing was the ultimate goal, that if I had my own poetry book, or if I was featured in a book of poetry or any type of publication, my efforts as a writer, as a young poet, would be legitimized. And it took me a while, not very long. Fortunately, I went to college and realized that my conceptions were totally wrong. And in college, I think I was finally happy in so many ways. I made friends, period. I made friends. Not that I didn't have friends in high school, but I'm sure you can all relate. It's a different culture, definitely. And I was connecting with people who actually enjoyed reading and writing poetry and prose. So I became part of student organizations that would read, share, critique, give feedback, and try to, build up our poetry. And we even put together some publications, some that were more informal, just like a little bulletin, and an actual magazine that I think still exists to this day. It started with my group in freshman year at UPR. Also, simultaneously, I was very online. In the time, it was a 2000s, mid 2000s, early 2000s, I would say. So back in the day, I have no idea, since I can't see any of you, I don't know what my age ranges are here. But if you're younger, maybe you're aware of, but not too familiar with the concept of what personal websites were in the 2000s. You would technically build a site from scratch for free, and you could post anything you wanted, basically anything you wanted on your website. And a lot of us posted our writing. So I think that was the first time that I ever, before college, I was already like posting my rants and my poems online. But you didn't get much feedback from that. It was just suspended, and you really didn't keep track of who was reading. Nobody could comment. But there was LiveJournal, which is still alive and well today. Not as, I guess, popular, or definitely not as popular as it used to be. The LiveJournal was similar to Blogspot, similar to, not the same. You had a similar to Tumblr, I would say, but mostly relying on text. You had your friends page where you could see what everybody was posting. And I made some very good friends there, friends who I'm still friends with to this day from 20 years ago that I've never met in person. And many of them, I was surprised to find, became poets, teachers, writers. Big surprise. So I think that was my first experience actually sharing something in real time and have people comment on it, and mostly in positive ways, telling me, oh, this is so interesting, or maybe sharing their experience, like, oh, I had a dream like that, or oh, this is similar to this poem that I wrote. So that was very rewarding to start sharing in such a casual way, because there was really no pressure, no intention other than, oh, look guys, here's something I wrote. And after college, I've kept my LiveJournal, but like I said, it's not as popular. It's like it's deserted right now. But social media is, I think, what everybody uses nowadays, and it is an excellent tool, I think, for marketing, getting ideas from other people, learning about who is publishing right now. And then there's also the self-publishing phenomenon, which right now it's so much easier to do than it would have been 20, 15, even 10 years ago. It was a completely different, just a whole other, way to go about things, especially publishing. So I think I shouldn't switch slides just now. So I want to talk a little bit about what self-publishing. Self-publishing can offer. I mean, there are many platforms, many services, many ways to self-publish. Maybe some of you are already aware of that. So there's on-demand printing, which tends to be the most convenient because you can order, it's a file, technically it's a file that you send, and you can order your physical copy in whatever amounts you need, however often you need it. So this is different from, I guess, working, and please forgive me, I can only speak in reference to my experience in Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, you had to make huge orders of printed books in order to make it happen, and you needed a lot of money. So if you don't have funds, you can definitely consider self-publishing if you want to, put out a book in print. So what else? And even, I'm sorry, when you self-publish, if you order a certain amount of books, you can reach out to anyone who's willing to sell it. If you have local bookstores, you can ask them, hey, can I put some of my books in your bookstore? You can even donate to libraries so that they have your book. And I think one of the most valuable ways in which self-publishing has served me is that a book can be a coin if you are in a community of other published authors that are willing to exchange a book for a book. I put a bunch of books next to me that are local from Puerto Rico, also from very small publishers, and even some self-published books that I gathered from some of the friends and acquaintances that I made at book fairs, book presentations, different activities. So that's why I mentioned you need connections. It's good to know people who have a similar goal to yours, who have similar values, and obviously, you know, who are writing, who are your contemporaries. Now, a third book that I published under my my publisher, which I called how could I forget, Subverse. After Stars Like Fish, which was kind of a DIY project. It's interesting because I didn't really have any specific goal in mind. I didn't think, oh, I want to make a book. I just wanted well, I did want to make a book, obviously. I'm sorry, take that back. I did want to make a book. But I wanted to collect all of these journal entries, dreams and poems that I had written over the years into an actual tangible product, which is what Stars Like Fish ended up being. And I'm actually still very, very happy with it. So this was more successful than I expected. I didn't think anyone would buy it. I didn't think anyone outside of my immediate circle was interested in it. I have to admit that circle of support did help me, you know, make the book better known by sharing it with friends, students, anybody who they knew. Oh, maybe you might like this book. So definitely support systems are essential. You need to know people who are, you know, willing to help you out, if just by telling someone about your book. So because this was, to me, such a success, I'm not saying I made a lot of money from it. It's not a bestseller or anything like that, but compared to what I was expecting, to me it was a big success. So I decided to go with my second project, Where Everything Lost is Found. And I thought, you know what, if I can do this for myself, I could do it for other people. That was my intention then, and it still is. I still want to do that. I've just been so overwhelmed by other things. But for both of these books, I don't think I mentioned this earlier. I did the graphic design. You know, all the artwork, all the design of the interior, that was all me. So it was a lot of work. This was hours and hours of sometimes just getting the file right on Microsoft Word. So there are people who are specialists in doing this for a reason. I am not. I have edited for other people, but to be honest, I was not the best editor for myself. There are typos in both of these books, and I hate it, but they're there. But so because these books were around and other people knew what I was doing, I was reached out to. I had a friend who said, hey, I have a manuscript. I have a collection of short stories that I'd like to make into a book. Do you think you could help me? And this is Sparks by Zuleika Robles. And this to me was very special as well, because it started out with her and a few of her friends who were graphic artists or visual artists who she wanted to include. And I said, sure, let's include them. And I think I told some other people about other artists and just people we both knew, acquaintances that we had in common. They were so willing, so excited to make art for this book that there's about, I'm sorry if I'm exaggerating, I might be by a little bit, but I think there are 20 different artists. There's almost more art than there is text in the book. Sometimes we have multiple artworks, interpretations of these short stories. So this was something that to me it brought a lot of people together. And it was very gratifying. It was also extremely time consuming because, again, I was the one doing the, the Microsoft Word files and making it all fit together. But once, you know, these 3 books were in circulation, I did gain a lot of support and a lot of recognition from local publishers, writers, authors around me. Mostly, like I said, the exchange of books. So often I would trade a book for a book, and that to me, you know, enriched my library. And these aren't the only ones. I just have a limited amount of books where I am because I've been moving so often. So some of them are still in books, but I do know, just by the look of them, look and feel, that some of these are using the same on-demand printing platform that I do. They're the same size, same, kind of general layout. So there are ways that we can take advantage of what is available to us. If you don't have the money, I mean, ideally, you don't want to spend money to publish a book, but the reality is that some publishers will ask you for money, or if you want to do it yourself, it can be costly. But one of the most, I think, cost-effective ways is to do it yourself. So that is almost it for my presentations. Some of my concluding thoughts are, if you are a writer of anything at all, whatever draws you, if it's, if you like writing articles, poems, essays, stories, novels, keep doing it. Please never abandon it. I don't think if you are, you probably won't abandon it. And publishing is a way to connect. So I wrote this note for myself that publishing is a way to feel that you are contributing to your community, and it can result in very meaningful exchanges and connections with other people. So what it means to publish, I think, to me, this is obviously my perspective, that's really the ultimate goal behind publishing, is to share and to connect in the same way that we feel connected to poets, authors, artists that might be dead from hundreds of years ago. And in sharing, just sharing, hey, I feel this certain way about a certain poem, and so does your friend. And that creates a sense of unity, and it does help us feel whole. So as much of a loner as you might be, I think human connection is always something we need, even if it's through a screen. So thank you all very much for listening to me. I hope you took notes of your comments and your questions, because I would love to hear what you have to say.